welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. My name is Jessikah. I am your host today, and I am really excited to have our guest here today who has written so many wonderful books, and we are about to talk about one of your books of short stories. Why don't you, first of all, tell everyone who you are, and then let's talk about Januaries.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Olivie Blake. I am a huge supporter of libraries. I actually wrote, I think the first book I ever wrote was for the library summer competition. And I won, although that did not change my life in any way. That's not when I knew I had to be a writer or anything like that. It would take many more years after that. But anyway, so I'm Olivie Blake. Under my pseudonym, I write for adult science fiction and fantasy. And then under my real name, Alexine Farrell-Fulmuth, I write young adult books. I am probably best known for The Atlas 6 or Alone with You in the Ether, but I'm very excited to be talking about Januaries because it is a collection of short stories that I wrote basically over the last decade of my life. So varying, there's a lot of just different things I was thinking about, different types of stories. It definitely ultimately reads a little bit like bedtime stories for adults, because I think when I think about short form, I immediately go to my love of fairy tales, the Grimm's brothers, the Brothers Grimm, I should say, and Edgar Allan Poe. And I think that's what I was trying to do here, was riff on that type of storytelling.
You do a really good job, and there's just a bunch of stories in general that just sort of stand out for me. And I think one of my questions before I even talk about just some of the themes that come up in the stories is, when you're writing short form versus a novel, how do you know that this particular story is going to be short form? Was there a point where you had sort of almost like a growing seed in your mind and you knew what it was going to bloom into, and it was that, it wasn't going to have arcs, this is how it was going to go, this is where it was going to end?
This is a very good question. And I think it's very interesting because lots of people gauge how good a short story collection is by whether they would read a full book of that short story. But then the actual craft of it is that you can't do a short story as a book, because for me, the short story is really dependent on a plot twist, usually. I would say that I know something is a book because I know we have to spend a lot of time with the character, or character or characters, that we really have to know and understand the world in order to understand the full implications and all the themes and to really derive something. Whereas a short story is very plot driven. That's okay, we don't need to know that much. We need this much of a glimpse of the character, but there's usually some kind of gimmick, is not the right word, but some sort of gotcha. And so if I know the gotcha ahead of time, then I know it's a short story, because then I know it's more about the heel turn of what's really going on, which is not something you can really build out over a long period of time, like with a novel. And I think a good example of that would be the story Chaos Theory, which is very long. It's a novella. It's 30,000 words or something like that. But it couldn't have been any longer, because once you understand why we're in all these characters' lives, then the story, then you know the story, So it's once you understand what's happening, then you have already experienced most of what's in the plot. And if I couldn't drag, I couldn't keep the wool over your eyes for that much longer.
I think one of the things that I just love is, how you play with certain tropes and certain qualities, and, how certain things have a fairy tale quality to it, especially the Wish Bridge, which I know is early on, but I mean, what a story to just sort of lead with. It was very funny. It was very I keep thinking about this one thing that happens in it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. What, just something that just keeps coming up. And it was so funny and so just sort of indicative of people being told, be careful what you wish for, even though
Yeah.
it's something that unfolded almost off screen. but it was great. And then just, the story about like a being whose whole existence seems to be fulfilling other people. And it was just such a nice fairy tale, really. It felt familiar and new at the same time. You said that this started over a decade. When you choose what story is going to be where, did you do that chronologically, or did you kind of have to look at everything all together and almost like switch up cue cards? Like, okay, this is where I want to start. This is like a really good story for the middle, and this is a really good story to close with.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying all that about the Wish Bridge. It's definitely one of my best short stories. It's my husband's favorite thing that I've ever written. He's a little bit more of a romantic and an optimist than me. So his one concern is that I don't really tell you where they go at the end, or like I don't necessarily spell out the happy ending for you or what the wish is going to be. But I feel it's heavily implied, so that's enough. Um, but so actually, arranging the stories was the hardest part of the book. They're not arranged chronologically. I'm actually wondering now, if I were to do it chronologically, what order that would be. But the Wish Bridge is it's kind of in the middle. It's actually from a lot of these short stories were taken from my self-published fairy tale collections, of which there were 3 volumes, and the Wish Bridge is from the 2nd volume. And I did not want to put this story first because while I think it is a very good story, like certainly it's one of my best, it is so wholesome that I was concerned that if you start with the Wish Bridge, then you think that that's the tone that's going to be carried throughout the book, when I would argue it's in the minority. So but my editor was pretty insistent. I was like, do you think that people are going to get, we really went back and forth on arranging. Like it took a long time to decide, first of all, how to group the stories. I think I landed on the seasons because my editor, so the original fairy tale collections were called, they were all riffs on something else. So the first one was called Fairy Tales of the Macabre. The second one was Midsummer Night Dreams, and the third one was The Lover's Grimm. And so I wanted to call the full collection Lover, because the thing that all the stories had in common was about relationships, not necessarily romantic, but love in its various forms. And my editor fell in love with the story A Year in January, which is the last story in the collection. And that's definitely where I wanted to put it, that was the note I wanted to end on. And so she suggested we call it Januaries. And I was like, okay, well, if we're going to call it Januaries, which sounds perfectly fine to me. I was born in January, so I'm on board with this self-reference. Then why don't we break the stories up by like their tone, and let's match the tone to the season. So I had a lot of fun and difficulty choosing the epigraphs for each of the seasons to set what I felt would be the tone of each section, and then determining what should go in each group. And the way that my editor arranged it was very different from the way that I arranged it. So there was some back and forth. But so she wanted to start with the Wish Bridge, and I was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. I think it might be misleading. And she was like, well, I don't really care. We want people to fall in love. Like, we want people to continue, right? We want people to keep going. I had actually put The Audit, which was the second story, first. And my editor, Lindsay, was like, no, that's got to come second. Like, let's open with this story that's pretty universally lovable. And then that way we've got them, and then we keep going. And I think I had originally put Sucker for Pain. I think I had put Sucker for Pain like in summer or something. I had put it in a different section, and then she was pretty insistent on where that should go as well. Anyway, the Animation Games is probably one of my best known. Like if I have a cult classic, then the Animation Games is the one that's like very Olivie Blake. And then some of the newer ones, actually, there's a story called Sous Vide that exists in the collection in autumn, specifically because I didn't think that autumn felt autumn enough. Like I think autumn as a season is one of the most evocative ones. I guess arguably each season is very evocative, but I felt that specifically because I'm known for dark academia and I'm known for psychological thriller, and like especially because my books pop up in the autumn, like for Masters of Death too, that autumn was not strong enough without it. So like right before I submitted it, I wrote Sous Vide, and just literally just to contribute to the vibe of like, and now we're in autumn.
No, that's actually lovely. And I love Sucker for Love too, by the way. But I must say, I do agree with your editor. I am a big fan of being built up and having my heart broken slowly. I
Yeah.
am 100% on board when I watch something, when I watch anime, when I watch a TV show, when I read a book, when I'm listening to music, I want my heart built up, and then I want someone to come with that hammer and just shatter it. So I agree. I like that wholesome moment. And I guess because maybe I am a little bit more like you than your husband, I do want to be destroyed. There are
Yeah.
people who disagree with me, and there are people who do not read what I read because they're like, nope, 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 nope. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. This is
Yes,
very fun.
yes.
So I thought it was great.
I was going to add that. So when we were arranging it and I was trying to explain to my editor why I wanted certain things in certain order, one of the stories that we argued about was pre-existing condition, which is the one where she doesn't, she is alive, but she was resurrected and she doesn't know who she used to be and she doesn't remember anything about herself. And I was insistent that that took place in summer because it was very, very hot and that it be in the collection. And we disagreed about this. And so I wanted, it's one of the newer stories as well. And but it is one of the more toxic ones. So when I was explaining to her why it should go where it was, I ended up categorizing each of the stories as toxic or as wholesome or problematic. So it was either happy ending, ambiguous ending, problematic, or wholesome. And so I was like, we can't have two wholesomes in a row. We can't have two problematics in a row. We can't have like, there had to be a sort of a really rich tapestry of emotion here. And so that's how we broke it down. And so pre-existing condition, which is about a very, very toxic relationship, comes after To Make a Man, which is a very like emotionally moving story. Like people who love to have their heart break people who love to have their hearts broken love To Make a Man because it is heartbreaking, but it ends on this note of hope. And so I was like, great. Now that we have this hopeful note, let's talk about these very, very toxic women.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up To Make a Man also, which I thought was really good. You know, a lot of the stories they deal a little bit with like fate and just the nature of it and the nature of whether or not, you know, you should know what your future is and how that can go in various directions. There's also, you know, you play a lot with mythology, which I
Mhm.
adore. Um, and then, you know, you also have some themes of parenthood, and that one hit me very, very hard as a mother. And I say that in a great way. It was so just real and raw and honest in a way that I wish more stories about that topic were. Um, Thematically, how did you feel that, you know, certain topics like that fit in just sort of with the, I guess, like the more airy, hopeful ones?
Yeah. So the motherhood story, Monster Love, is one of the newer stories in the collection. It's narrated incredibly by Alex Palting. She does a really, really excellent job of delivering what is essentially slam poetry. Like she just does this really life-changing performance. I think that people either really connect with this story or they really can't vibe with it. They just like can't get into the rhythm of it. And I completely understand. But it's also the one that like I was asked to do a reading and I read this one because it's kind of one of those ones that it has to be read to you or you have to feel that story in your bones. And so I wrote it at a time when I very much was. So it's one of the stories that actually my editor asked me to write because I initially submitted as news stories, chaos theory, and pre-existing condition. And then like I said, we were in disagreement about pre-existing condition. And she was like, I just want to write, I want to read something very authentic from you. Like I want something that feels really real. And specifically something about who you are now. And then I said, just a second, my son is throwing up in my hands. Like we were on the phone and I don't know what I think he had bit into a mandarin that had a seed in it unexpectedly. And then so as he was spitting it out, he also gagged. And I was like, hold on, I have to catch his vomit literally in my bare hands. And she's like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, how can you be this, whatever book talk sensation and a mother at the same time? And like, what is that like to exist in these different, to have one thing going on with your career and to be this completely other kind of person? And that was a really interesting prompt for me. I say in the acknowledgments that I wrote this story for her. I mean, of course, this story is like very much for me and for my son and for other mothers. But I think her asking me to think about it that way, to say something honest, and the way it came to me in this very disjointed language and like these very like broken phrases. I think to me it really indicates my mixed state of mind being a mother who's very like on social media and hearing all this stuff that's so contradictory about how to do parenting correctly. There's all these sorts of like drops of like, well, like gentle parenting language and why you should sleep train and all this stuff, and just how confusing it is to be a person and also to be a person with a mental disorder because I have bipolar. And so to kind of deal with the changes in my own body, the weird like dysmorphia that come from being postpartum, from being pregnant and then being a mother. And then just like, it's like your brain and your body are just two completely different operations. And I wanted to write something about those really, really hectic and confusing and mixed, like the beginning of motherhood. But I also didn't want to end it, like I wanted to end it in a way that meant something, or that, because I think there's like Night Bitch is a really good example of a motherhood narrative that's kind of disjointed, that's very like there's elements of satire, and that has a wonderful ending as well. And same with Normal Women by Ainsley Hogarth. There's a lot in this subgenre, of like motherhood fiction. And I wanted to end it on something that was like, I don't know. It was hard to like choose a landing, I guess, and for the ending that I chose to be like, the whole thesis of Monster Love is that a mother's love is the anti-self, that the child is the anti-self, that he pulls you away from yourself. And then to end on a note that's like, that's not what it is actually, was really nice. That was like that, no, I haven't lost any of myself. Myself is continuing to grow as I also contribute to this other self. So yeah, that was a really, really meaningful one for me.
Absolutely. And I think that you nailed it for me, who went through a very difficult pregnancy with twin boys, being 4'11" and under 100 pounds when I started the pregnancy, and sick every day. And then, like you're sort of fed a lot of fantasy about what pregnancy is and about
Yes.
motherhood is and about what, certain things are. And for some people, I do suppose it probably does work out that way, and, good for them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's wonderful. Congratulations.
congratulations. But it's very hard. And you're right. It is this dysmorphia. And especially, if you have a trajectory that you feel like it'll be so easy to roll my kids into this because you hear that this person did it and this person did it.
Mhm, mhm.
But then, your body is borrowed for a while and your mind becomes this big pit of what if, and
Yes.
sometimes it does not agree with you, and sometimes it feeds you memories that are a little distorted because you're worried about what the future could bring,
Mhm.
and you come out of it with this person, or for me, these two people who you're like, can I actually meet these needs, and do my own needs matter? And I think there is like this weird dysmorphia in it where
Mhm.
you don't recognize yourself and you don't recognize your life. And it is very easy to be like, oh, this is, like the anti self, but you have to sort of figure out how everything fits together and weaves together. So I thought it was just I thought, from my point of view, I thought it was a very hopeful story. But again,
Thank you.
yeah, it is a very personal experience. And, I do wish people talked a little bit more about just the variables that come with parenthood, because it is kind of toxic positivity
Yeah.
when you're being basically marketed as there's perfect parenting, and it's not it's not attainable. It's not one size fits all.
No, it definitely is not. And I feel very fortunate that I wasn't exclusively fed the narrative of like, oh, motherhood is going to change you. Like you're going to be a totally different person. You'll love the way you never knew you could love. Because some of the people who talked to me who were aware of my mental disorder were like, just so you know, like you're at super high risk for postpartum depression, you're at high risk for postpartum psychosis. There is a chance that that love will take a while, that like, you know, that maybe for a while you feel kind of a weird disconnect to your infant, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. That's just what your hormones are doing. And you know, because this person that you're told you have to care about is functionally a stranger. Like yes, they've taken up all the resources of your body, but you've never met them before. And so that's when, and I also went into motherhood thinking I wasn't going to be a particularly good mother. Like I'm more known as a person for my ambitions and my, you know, the kind of the discipline that I have and how badly I want things and the kind of career I wanted to have. And that's the kind of woman who is never told you're going to be a wonderful mother, that you're going to be great and soft and kind. Like those are not. And then when my son was born, it was this like, it was what everyone says it will be. That for me, it was completely life-changing, that this was this person that I just immediately fell in love with. And I love being a mother, but it also comes with its complications, and it feels weird to, you know, to say that it should only feel like one thing. I think that's why it was fun to write about motherhood as shape-shifting, because you really are never in one place for very long. It's not euphoria all the time, but it definitely sometimes is.
I really felt that this was just a really special collection of stories, and I'm really glad that you wrote them and that you're sharing them. What are you working on now? Or is there anything on the horizon for you?
Mhm. Yes, I have 2 books coming out next year, and I'm gonna start with the later one just because it's more relevant to the topic of motherhood. So in October, my book, Girl Dinner, is coming out. It's a satire about a cannibal sorority, and it follows 2 storylines. One of them is the sophomore who's rushing the sorority, and the other one is the professor who, she's a spousal hire, so she has not been working because her husband, who's a professor, changed schools, and she's been with their 18-month-old, and so her child is just starting daycare, and she's just starting at this school that doesn't even really want her. You know, she came from what's called a SLAC, a small liberal arts college. There it is. And so it's just a very different environment. And it was really interesting to write both of these experiences of like the young woman who is, you know, very online and very exposed to this book is very much in conversation with things like the Barbie movie or the books Fleischman is in Trouble or The Best of Everything by Rona Jaff, because those pieces of art come to the conclusion that it is not possible as a woman to have it all. And I don't know that I am coming to a different conclusion necessarily, but I wanted to ask more questions about what does that mean, and what does it mean to be a mother or to be a young woman, and how do we deal with that reality of not necessarily having as much impact on the world as we want to, and the expectations on us are so high. And then in the spring, so that's the second book. The first book that comes out on April 1st is Gifted and Talented, which is basically pitched as Succession, but with magic. So it's 3 siblings that come together after their father has died, and they do not know which one is going to inherit the company. So it's a family dramedy. It's actually twice as long as Girl Dinner because it's a lot more about the siblings and their relationships. It's that very like character driven stuff that I love to do. So that was also very fun.
It almost sounds, I mean, I suppose at this point, it's not like people and, siblings arguing over inheritance is really that much of a singular story. It's universal, but I always think King Lear when I think
Oh
about,
yeah. Oh yeah. Like King
right?
Lear is definitely part of it. It's a definite influence. But it's actually really inspired by the Royal Tenenbaums, the Wes Anderson film, which is like one of my favorites.
That movie. It's
Yes, it's
it's
such
such a
a
good
good movie.
movie.
And Gwyneth Paltrow, I made one little reference, and there is one, the stand up and let me look at you does happen in Gifted and Talented, because Gwyneth Paltrow is so iconic in that movie.
Well, thank you so much, Olivie Blake. This is wonderful. Please come back and talk to us about any of those books or movies or whatever you want
Yeah,
to talk
yeah,
about.
absolutely.
Come back to Syosset Library. And if you're ever in town, maybe we can do an author visit or something.
It would be my pleasure.
All right. So once again, this was Jessikah with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. Our guest was
Olivie Blake.
And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.